Michael Gableman, the former state Supreme Court justice overseeing the Republican-led review of the 2020 election, is set to testify before the Assembly Elections Committee Tuesday. Speaker Robin Vos has said that may include his final report. Gableman has conducted his review in private. Most recently, he's asked to jail the chairwoman of the State Elections Commission and Racine Mayor Cory Mason. Gableman says they, along with several other election officials, have failed to comply with his subpoenas. Racine Mayor Cory Mason joining us now. So glad to have you with us on the show today. Have you responded to Gableman, or when was the last time you talked to him?
Yeah, so, we have produced thousands of pages of records. This is, and just as a reminder for people, these are issues that have been litigated, have been through multiple court cases at the state and federal level. We've had a legislative audit bureau, the Elections Commission sign off on activities that occurred in 2020. It's not entirely clear to me what exactly they're still looking for. But again, we're happy to answer questions in public, in the light of day, in front of the Elections Commission. But this is not a criminal probe. This is a project of the Assembly Elections Committee. And if they want to hear from me or other officials, I think they should do it in public so that the press and the public have the opportunity to see what exactly is going on here.
What did the petition exactly say about jail time?
So again, it is a bizarre thing, right? I can't believe that that for whatever reason, the work that we did to make it safe for people to vote during a pandemic is now leading to me and other elected officials being threatened with jail time because we won't go to a secret interview. I certainly don't want to go to jail, but if it's something that I would have to do to defend democracy and stand up for the clerks and all the poll workers who did all that hard work, certainly something I would do.
So you're saying you would go to jail instead of going and...
I certainly don't want to. I think the best course of action is to have this hearing in front of the public in the state capitol so everyone can understand what is going on.
You don't want to, but you would rather go to jail versus have this private meeting.
I don't think it can set up a precedent where we let unelected officials threaten elected officials and clerks and election officials charged with safely conducting elections with jail time if they can't have their secret investigation. That's not how democracy works, right? That is not what you do in a free and fair democracy. You don't threaten people with jail time because you don't like how the election results went. If they have legitimate questions, the Assembly Committee should ask them in public. But again, for our poll workers, for our clerks, for these election officials who figured out how to do an election in the midst of the worst pandemic in 100 years, they don't deserve subpoenas. They deserve medals. These are people who went out of their way to make sure that people could safely vote in the midst of a pandemic. And more than a year later, to still have scrutiny under this after multiple court cases, audits, investigations, and still have no clarity on where this is going to end, it really has to stop. And so if that means that I or other people have to say, enough, let's do this in the light of day, or, if you're really threatening us with jail time, I think that's something I certainly wouldn't want to do, but it's something I'd be willing to do if it means defending democracy and those poll workers and clerks who have worked so hard to make sure that we have free and fair elections in this state.
Let's talk about how we got here. It sounds like the reason Racine is tied up in this is because of the money from the Center for Tech and Civic Life funded by Mark Zuckerberg. How much money did the city get?
It was I don't know the exact amount. It was over $1 million that the city of Racine received. We came to the April election in 2020, and we'd done all this work to do drive-through voting and make all these accommodations to make sure that people could safely vote. We'd spent our entire year's budget just making sure people could safely vote in April. So then we moved forward on trying to figure out how to do two really important things that cities are called on to do. Make sure that people are healthy and safe because of the pandemic, and conduct free and fair elections. So we knew it was going to have to be different. And so we worked collaboratively and very publicly with 4 other mayors to talk about what it would take to safely conduct an election. Now, why it is in a state where over 200 communities receive funding from this, they're only targeting the 5 cities over this is still unclear to me. I don't know if it's because this is where people of color vote. I don't know if there's some sort of concern about what happened here, but everything we did was before our councils. We were very public about what we intended to do. And if there's a problem with that, again, the place to have the conversation about that is in the Assembly Committee in the Capitol in public. It has been scrutinized through several courts and found The legal challenges to that have all been found lacking.
A criticism about the money is that it got Democrats specifically to the polls. Is there any proof of that?
None that I've seen. And again, the point of the grants isn't to get one party elected or not elected. The point of the grants was to allow cities, whether it was the big 5 cities or the more than 200 across the state that received funding, some in heavily Republican areas as well. The point of it was to allow people to vote safely in the midst of a pandemic. That is the point of it.
Going forward, would you accept private money like that again?
So the city of Racine on Tuesday will have on its agenda grant money that we're hoping to get for firefighters, for community policing, for any number of things. I certainly wouldn't rule it out in the future. Again, it has not been found unlawful or wrong in any way. This is what allowed us to let people safely vote during an election. And for people to try to make that somehow unlawful or untowards because we helped people participate in their democracy is really shameful.
Mayor Corey Mason, thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, the RNC heads to Nashville. Reince Priebus is standing by with new insight into Milwaukee's pitch to host the 2024 Republican National Convention.